Today I want to talk to you, as Bill said, about some fiscal issues and school choice. And let me give you a little roadmap. And see, you can see Ming's way off here. I'm going to talk about staffing in public schools, the United States and Oklahoma, and the significant opportunity costs that these staffing decisions have incurred. I'm going to talk a little bit about the teacher shortage, and I put shortage in quotes, you'll see. Then finally, I'll talk about does school choice harm state budgets, and does school choice harm the budgets of local school districts? And actually, Ming, I paid her, and she actually fixed the rest of my talk. So it won't be as boring as it would have been.
We want her instead.
So yeah, I hear that everywhere I go. People want Ming instead of me. It makes me cry. This was a paper I wrote a few years ago for the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice called The Staffing Surge. And what I found was this is publicly available data from the US Department of Education. State departments of education report this data to the feds. And what I found was that from 1950 to 2009, over that 60-year period, there was a 96% increase in full-time equivalent public school students. At the same time, total school personnel, FTEs, increased 4 times as fast. What was the distribution of that increase in public school personnel? Well, I separated public school personnel as best I could into lead teachers and everybody else. So the teachers, the 252%, so the increase in lead teachers was 2.5 times the increase in students. I think people knew this was going on because we had a policy of cutting class sizes. Teachers wanted it, the public wanted it, we did it. But I don't think people knew about the increase in administrators and all other staff that increased 7 times as fast as the increase in students. I got the idea from this paper from public school teachers because they knew this was going on. You could argue in the 1950s, the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, that this staffing surge was warranted because we integrated schools, because we decided to finally teach students with special needs, etc. But what you'll see on the next slide is this is still going on. Again, this was the most recent data I had available at the time. From 1992 to 2009, increase in students 17%, school personnel 39%, teachers 32%, administrators and other staff 46%. Again, this is national data for right now. Some notes about the public school hiring spree. You'll hear people say, well, the kids are worse. There's only been 2 studies on this, and they found that kids are actually slightly more advantaged today than they were in 1970. There's fewer kids in the family, and that's been shown to increase student achievement. Parents are wealthier, that's been shown to increase student achievement. Parents are more educated now than they were. That's about to change, unfortunately, and that's to promote student achievement. There's other things that have, like the breakdown of the family, but on balance, the conditions for students are more favorable now than they were in 1970, according to the only 2 studies on the subject. No Child Left Behind did not cause the staffing surge. They like to blame it on that. You're making us give tests, you're going to hold us accountable, we need to hire more staff. Actually, if you look at my report, the No Child Left Behind period moderated those trends. And we put more resources into the classroom in the No Child Left Behind era and less in the central office. So you can't blame it on No Child Left Behind. And American public schools are more top-heavy than all nations in the OECD. So among rich nations, we're the most top-heavy public schools in the world. Didn't Ming do a good job? So what about student achievement? Didn't student achievement skyrocket during the staffing surge? Actually, no. The red line is national NAEP test scores for 17-year-olds for reading. From 1992 to 2009, national NAEP reading test scores for 17-year-olds actually fell by a couple of points during the staffing surge. National math scores were flat during this time period. Public high school graduation rates did increase 1 percentage point during the staffing surge. But I'm an economist, I'm trained to use data. You've got to put data in context. So let's put this in context by looking at the prior time period. 1970 to 1992, we had an 8% decrease in student counts in public schools as we moved from the baby boom to the baby bust. right? We still increased staff dramatically, and the public high school graduation rate fell 5 percentage points. So I don't think you can look at this data and make an argument that the increase in staffing was beneficial. But you could argue, well, look, you stopped at 2009. That was the most recent data I had. At that time, we went into the Great Recession. I'm finishing a paper right now called Beyond the Staffing Surge. So if you look at the data from 2009 to 2013, which is the most recent I could get, and this is still United States, we had a 1% increase in students, 2.3% decrease in staff. You've heard news story after news story about this historic decrease in staff. Put that in context with the tremendous increases we've had for 6 decades prior to that. That decrease doesn't look very big. Where was the decrease? 3.5% decrease in teachers, 1% decrease in all other staff. All right? But surely student achievement just tanked, right, when we were cutting staff in public schools, didn't it? Right? Well, actually, national reading scores went up a point. National math scores were flat, and public high school graduation rates went up a whole lot during this time period. Now, I think a lot of this was them playing with the numbers because of No Child Left Behind, but they went up nonetheless. I'm sure some of that increase was real. What about Oklahoma? Okay, so now let's put together 92 all the way to 2013. So this is the United States, right? So 18% increase in students, 36% increase in total staff. So the total staff increased at twice the rate as the increase in students, and this includes the Great Recession time period, right? Teachers, other staff, right? So same pattern, right? What about Oklahoma? Your pattern was similar, right? 14% increase in students in Oklahoma during this time period, 21% increase in other staff, but look, the increase in teachers did not match the increase in students, but the increase in other staff was much greater, 33%. So it's a similar but somewhat different pattern than the feds. All right, let's do this. I'm an economist, right? And we think about opportunity costs. Let's do this thought experiment. What if instead of the 33% increase, so let's go back. So what if instead of that 33% increase in other staff, what if it had only increased at 14%? You know, matching the increase in staff, the increase in students. So what if it had been proportional, right? What would have been the budget savings to the state of Oklahoma? Okay, I estimate that would have saved Oklahoma over $294 million in annual recurring savings. So year after year after year. How did I get that dollar amount? Well, I increased other staff at 14% instead of 33%, and then I assumed that the total employment cost of those other staff, so salary, benefits, retirement, healthcare, FICA, unemployment insurance, training costs, recruiting costs, was $50,000 per FTE. Now, if you're thinking about a curriculum director or associate superintendent or an assistant principal, $50,000 is ridiculously low. But for a janitor, that's a bit high. Right? On average, I think I'm really underestimating this cost. I looked at this, I've detailed data for Georgia. $50,000 is very low for Georgia when you consider all non-lead teachers, right? Because of the benefit costs are very high, even for folks who are low paid. Right? What could Oklahoma Public Schools do with $294 million per year forever? Right? One thing you could have done is given over 36,000 Oklahoma students $8,000 scholarships to attend the school of their choice. That's one thing you could do with $294 million. Another thing you could do with it, as Bill alluded to, was you could give every teacher in Oklahoma a little over $7,000 a year raise. Another thing you could do with this, cut state and local taxes or some combination of the three, right? So these staffing decisions have real costs to taxpayers and to the education system. Okay, in fiscal year 2013, in the US, there were 8.1 full-time equivalent students for every 1 full-time equivalent public school employee. In Oklahoma, if you think more people are better, right, you were slightly better staffing than the national average in fiscal year 2013. You were 8 FTE students for every 1 FTE staff person. How does that break down? In terms of teachers, you have 16.1 students per teacher, whereas the US had 16. But on pupil versus non-lead teachers, so pupils per everybody else, you have 15.8 pupils per full-time equivalent non-teacher, where the US is 16.2. So clearly in the US, the priority has been on adding people not as lead teachers, but it's more so in Oklahoma public schools. Oklahoma is now what I call a top-heavy state. So I was able to get fiscal year 2014 data off your state website. You now employ over 1,600 more non-teachers than teachers in your public schools. This is a new phenomenon in American education, and pretty much all states except for 2 are heading in this direction. So they either already have more non-teachers than teachers, or they will soon. So less than half of FTE employees in Oklahoma public schools are lead teachers. Again, all these data are publicly available. Your state Department of Education reports it to the US Department of Education, who puts it out through the Digest of Education Statistics and what's called the Common Core of data. It's nothing to do with Common Core, right? And you can, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can pull this off the web. When I first wrote the staffing surge report, I got beat up by a bunch of different groups funded by public education. None of them questioned my numbers, none. And I'm sure they double checked it. That's the first thing I would do, right? None of them questioned the numbers. A little bit about the teacher shortage. I've done a lot of research on teacher labor markets. I'm an economist, and a shortage means something. You don't literally have a teacher shortage. A teacher shortage would mean you have a class of 25 kids sitting there looking at a blackboard with no adult in the front, right? I would hazard a guess that does not exist anywhere in these United States, including Oklahoma, right? So the issue is, do we get a teacher of the quality we want in front of that classroom? And that is the question, right? So the goal is you want to maximize the pool of really good teachers so the public schools can hire the best, right? Hiring teachers through alternative routes is not necessarily a bad thing. When I worked I worked for 2 governors in Georgia. When I worked for the second one, I was the one pushing for this. And so in 2003, we passed a law in Georgia that said if you have a 2.5 GPA in college, you have a content major, right? And you can pass a basic skills test, you can pass a pedagogy test, and you can pass a content test, you can teach in Georgia. Public schools can hire you. That's it. In Oklahoma, you have something similar, but in your first 3 years, you have to complete 18 credit hours of education courses. That's going to be a deterrent for someone to switch careers because you're increasing the cost to them of becoming a teacher. No one is forced to hire any specific alternative teacher, right? So what you'll hear a superintendent say is, oh, some unemployed yahoo's going to apply and you want me to hire him. No, don't hire him. You should hire the best and brightest wherever you can get them. You want to make the alternative pool as large as possible so that public schools can hire the very best teachers by any means necessary. And I think you need 2 things. You need to have a marketing campaign to let the public know that alternative teachers are welcome. I read some news accounts in Oklahoma, and the way public school leaders are trained, and even some private school leaders are trained in their college of education, they think alternative certification is a failure, right? You know what? I couldn't find fully certified teachers, so I got to get these losers and I get them in there and this is terrible, and we get them emergency certified. You've got to tell smart college graduates, because I teach college. I've taught at several colleges. You have a lot of juniors and seniors who are smart that say, I didn't major in education, but I think I'd like to be a teacher. Now in Georgia, they can. If you have just a small marketing campaign to let them know they're welcome. And America is full of these people. I'm not one of them. Brandon's not one of them. They're called do-gooders. There's tons of do-gooders in this country, right? Offense intended, right? He made fun of me at the beginning. I'm getting him back, right? No, but to be serious, he's a do-gooder, right? But like Damon, you're a do-gooder, right? There's a lot of people that are good people that when they've made some money perhaps, maybe their spouse is making more money than they planned, and they want to be a teacher. Let them know they're welcome. But second thing you got to do is you got to educate public school leaders because they had drilled in their head that these alternative teachers are morons. Show them this. I've done this many times. It works every time, right? There's lots of studies, not lots, there's a few studies that show that teachers that went through traditional routes are on average slightly more effective teachers than teachers who came through alternative routes. But an estimator is a random variable and has a distribution, right? So that regression coefficient is measuring those peaks. So let's say the green bell curve is the distribution of effectiveness for traditionally licensed teachers. And let's say the purple distribution is the distribution of effectiveness for alternative teachers. If you ban the purple teachers, if you're public schools, you're going to start hiring on the right. You're going to hire the green teachers that are most effective, then you're going to go up the bell curve, and then you're going to go down. So if you ban the purple teachers, you're hiring the yahoos on the left. You're hiring Brandon and me. Do you want them teaching our kids? Cuss with me, front row. Heavens no. Heavens no, right? Watch your language, foul-mouthed front row guy, right? But listen, right? So if you allow public schools to hire the purple teachers, they get more people on the right, more people that are effective, right? The literature on teacher effectiveness is unanimous. The distribution in the quality of teachers is enormous. Little known fact, everyone here went to school and we observed this, right? Some of our teachers were awesome, some of their teachers were like me, right? They were terrible, right? So if you let more people come from the right, hey, but guess what? Guess what the majority of the research shows? The green teachers are the alternative teachers and the purple teachers are the traditionally licensed teachers, right? That's the paper I gave you. So we're banning, on average, the best teachers. Those bell curves, school leaders can understand that. And what they say to me when I show it to them, they go, no one ever explained it that way. Right? But they get that. And they know the wide distribution of teacher quality. Right? Okay, fiscal effects of school choice on state and local budgets. Right? And I also wrote, I have 2 copies of this. I also wrote this for the Friedman Foundation as well. It's on the web, but I can give someone a copy if they want. Right? It's very straightforward to design a school choice program that saves the state budget money. Right? Just make the average scholarship amount less than average state spending in public schools. Right? And if you're pulling kids from the public school, that's going to save the state budget money. Like, for example, the Nevada just passed a universal ESA. It's not really universal because you have to be enrolled in a public school for over a semester before you're eligible. So you really are pulling kids out of public school. But the fiscal effects of school choice on public school districts is actually a little more complicated. So I think it's a legitimate question to say, when we put in a school choice program, are the kids who are left behind in public schools going to be harmed from that school choice program? So the ones who don't take up the choice. They're not harmed academically, and most of the research finds they're actually benefit academically. Public school student achievement tends to go up. I believe it's 21 out of 22 studies find that student achievement goes up in public schools as a response to school choice. The other study found no effect, right? And it was a small school choice program that one found. But it is a legitimate question, do students who remain in public schools have less resources available for their education when some students leave via school choice? Right? And that's what I looked at in this report for the Friedman Foundation. All right. And the way I'm thinking about it is, look at the bottom here. School choice programs that allow public school districts to retain funding for any fixed costs do not harm the fiscal health of public schools and do not leave fewer resources available for students who remain in public schools, right? If you went to a college and took Accounting 101 or Econ 101, you saw this chart, right? All costs are either fixed or variable in the short run. So you got total expenditures per student. Some of those expenditures per student are fixed, some are variable. when the US Department of Education collects spending data from state departments of education, they put all public school spending into these buckets. Capital, interest, administration, instruction, student support, etc. So my job was to say which of these buckets were fixed costs in the short run, which of these were variable costs. So how do I decide which of these costs are fixed and variable? If you ask a superintendent, public school superintendent, they're going to say, oh, all my costs are fixed, blah, 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 right? They say things like, when that one kid leaves with that voucher, right? It's the same superintendent in every state. In my state, he has my accent. In your state, he has yours, right? And he says, legislators laugh at this every time. All right, when that one kid leaves with that voucher, well, number one, he'd be lucky if only one kid left, right? And then he says, when that one kid leaves that voucher, still got to pay that light bill, still got to pay that teacher, still got to pay that bus driver, right? So what he's saying is all his costs are fixed. But the legitimate question is, not do they want to cut costs when they lose students, not do they say they can, but is it feasible for them to cut certain costs when they lose students for any reason? Because little known fact, students transfer from this public school to that one. Sometimes kids move out of state, right? Never had this before. No one knew this, right? It happens. So I looked, see, Georgia's a really growing state, so this was hard. I used Georgia data because I know it best. I found 4 school districts that lost students for non-school choice reasons, and I looked at what cost categories they were able to reduce. And what I found was, in that red box there, these 4 school districts, and they range from Atlanta public schools to 2 small rural ones and then 1 in the middle, so I had small, medium, and large school districts. I found they were able to reduce instruction, student support, instructional staff support, enterprise, and food services commensurate or more than commensurate with their decrease in students. So if they lost 2% students, they were able to cut these by more than 2% from one year to the next. And there was no decline in student achievement in these districts. Capital, interest, administration, operations, maintenance, transportation, other, those did not seem to be able to be reduced commensurate with their decrease in students. And in fact, the administration tended to go up when they lost students. And we saw that from the staffing surge earlier, right? So you see what I see in the green box here. So money that follows the child that's less than what's in that red box improves the finances of school districts, even in the very short run, from one year to the next. So I used this data, and I made calculations for every state. So in fiscal year 2009, which was the data I had at the time, right, Oklahoma Public Schools spent $8,700 per student. This is another thing they cheat on, is departments of education tend to keep 2 sets of books. They keep one set of data they send to the feds, and then on their website they have a lower spending level. I don't know what goes on here, but one state school superintendent, I was explaining this to her, and she said, well, what do the feds include? I'm like, all of it? Apparently that's not a common, So in Georgia, they hide we have elected state school superintendent. We've had a Republican since '96, a bunch of them. They hide $3.5 billion a year on our state website. State legislators believe, state board of education members believe, the public and the media believe that it's the lower spending number, but yet they report the truth to the feds because they have to. I was the education advisor to the governor. I couldn't get this fixed, right? So what I found was, using my methodology in Oklahoma, using the full amount they spend per student, that 67.2% of your 8,700 are short run variable costs. So that's $58.61 per student. So those are costs they can reduce from one year to the next. So if you have a school choice program where, say, only $5,000 or $5,500 leaves from one year to the next, that improves the finances of the local school district and leaves more resources for the students who remain in public schools. But remember what you learned in Accounting 101 and Econ 101. In the long run, all costs are variable, right? Costs are only fixed in the short run. In the long run, you can make new strategic decisions on how many schools you have, on how many staff you have, et cetera. And so in the long run, all money should follow the child to the school of their choice. Thus, any school choice program in Oklahoma where $58.61 per child or less follows the child to the school of her choice improves the fiscal situation of districts, and students who remain in schools have more devoted to their education. Keep in mind, when you're letting school districts retain funds for students they no longer serve, you're letting school districts retain funds for students they no longer serve. What business in America gets to do that? Not higher ed, not pre-K, not Walmart, right? Not any business. Does your business work that way? Let's think about this. I shop at Target for groceries week after week for years, and then one week I say, you know what, Walmart's a better deal for me, so I switch to Walmart. Does Target get to keep some of my money? Cuss with me, heavens no. Foul mouth in the front row, heavens no, right? This is, if you tell your state legislators, when they say something silly, make them look silly, right? They say this all the time. They're like, you're taking money from public schools, but you're taking customers too, right? No one else gets to keep money. They're getting paid for students they no longer serve. What? Because they get to keep, so for example, if you did, I'm just making this up out of pie in the sky, if you passed an ESA bill, just making that, you probably don't even know what that is, right? Making it up, right? I don't like the front row. Now listen. Do they have guns here? Okay, now listen. So if you pass an ESA bill, they get to keep all locally generated funds, and federal funding has these complicated hold harmless provisions, so they get to keep federal funds too, and they're losing customers. Think about that. Wish my business had that, right? The other thing, it's always a guy superintendent, no offense guys, right? Women have too much integrity. So the guy superintendent, again, it's the same guy in every state. He shows legislators, when I say this, they nod and they're like, yep, you are totally right, right? So the guy superintendent, he shows up at the K through 12 appropriations subcommittee meeting, or he testifies before the State Board of Education. He says, you know, we're growing students. We got more students coming, and so I got to hire more teachers and hire more bus drivers and build more schools. So he's arguing all his costs are variable, so he wants extra money for those variable students, right? And so like a lot of states have exceptional growth funding. So they have normal formula growth funding, but if you have high growth, we're going to give you even more because all your costs are variable. So that committee meeting's over. Then he goes 2 doors down, and now he's in the subcommittee debating a school choice bill, and he's saying all my costs are fixed, right? When those students leave, I still got to pay that teacher, still got to pay that bus driver. Which is it? Which is it? He's having it both ways. You can't let him have it both ways. You got to call a spade, all right? So let's say all his costs are fixed. Let's say he's telling the truth in the school choice meeting. He's not, but let's say he is, right? Then you got an easy way to fund school choice. Instead of giving enrollment growth money, which is millions and millions and tens of millions every year, you could use that to fund kids to have ESAs to go to schools of their choice. It's easy, right? All these reports I wrote are available at edchoice.org. So what does all this mean for you, right? You can design school choice programs that save the state of Oklahoma money and leaves more resources for students who remain in public schools. You can do that. Or you can give more state funding to public schools and wonder why the bureaucracy grows and student achievement does not. Remember my list of costs that I was treating as fixed in the short run. What I showed in the staffing surge is those are not fixed. They grow more rapidly than the increase in students. So I'm telling you, all my estimates here are very cautious and go against my thesis. Let me leave you with one parting thought. As a teacher, I'm always scared, right, that my students didn't learn anything, you know. So I'm going to teach you something in case maybe you heard nothing of value from me today. So I'll leave you with this. The state senator, Joey Bruss in Georgia, was a big school choice guy when I worked for Governor Perdue. And one day he got mad at me and he said, Scafidi, you're making us vote on all this tough stuff. You're coming with me. So he put me in the car and drove me to his district and took me to 3 town hall meetings one night. And there's no regular citizens at these town hall meetings, right? I'm not kidding. There was not one net taxpayer at these places, right? It was the road contractors, the hospitals getting Medicaid, and the teachers. And the teachers were all reading off their little cue cards saying, Senator Brush, why do you support charter schools and why do you support vouchers and blah, blah, blah. He had the best response. He said, you're a teacher, right? They'd be like, yeah. And he'd say, okay, you've got 25 kids in your class. Would it make your job easier if every kid in that class had a choice of 6, 7, 8 schools and their parents had chose your school because they bought into your values and your mission? Would that make your job easier? And all those union flags would go, yeah. And he's like, wouldn't your job be better if all the parents bought into your school and what you're trying to do? They'd be like, yeah, thank you. And they would slink away, right? It's a good line. It works with union flags because it wasn't on the card. Ming did the credits here. Ming said, by the credits, this is my daughter, I don't mean where he got all the info. I mean the credits for the cool stuff like transitions, color, animation, etc. I hope I made this talk interesting or less boring, because let's be honest, these talks aren't ever going to be interesting.